Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're about to start again, and we actually have a slightly different format for the next half an hour or so. So we will start with Mr. Sean Kidney, the CEO of Climate Bonds Initiative, who will kick us off with some interesting insights from across the globe and the trends of green bonds, etc. And then we will proceed to actually do a slightly more deep dive about sustainable finance and sustainability thinking in Poland, and also how it fits together with wider Europe, before we proceed with a special discussion about the EU Sustainable Finance Agenda, since we have whole 3 members of the EU Platform on Sustainable Finance here today. So I think you will hear some interesting new updates and what can you expect in 2023. So with much delight, I introduce Mr. Sean Kidney, who is also a platform member with Platform on Sustainable Finance, and has pretty much what I call the great thinker and the thought leader on green bonds and green financial instruments. So please, Sean, the floor is yours.
How long have I got now? Is it 2 hours or 3 hours?
I said 4. Yeah, as Joanna said, as long as it takes, but you know there are limits.
My most important title, of course, is an advisory panel member for the International Sustainable Finance Centre that Linda runs in CEU, which I'm here wearing that hat. I'm trying to think where to stand. I'll get a bit of mic. I don't need the mic. You know a little bit about the challenge of climate change in particular, which has been wrapped up in the challenge of energy security and managing global economic transitions, which I just want to talk a little bit about background. I'm going to share some views about what's happening globally. First is what became clear at Sharm el-Sheikh at the COP, and is also clear from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report last week, is that we've lost the fight against climate change. Let's be clear about that. 1.5 degrees is still the target as affirmed by the G20 in November. So the Paris Agreement is 2 degrees, 1.5 if we can. The G20 has said very clearly, actually 1.5 degrees is the target, which makes a big difference to Poland for that matter, because it's a third of the carbon budget. So it means our transition pathway is that much tougher. And there's a reason why it's the 1.5. Around stabilising global temperatures. As we get to 2 degrees, we start seeing the risk of runaway climate change, which takes us to 6 to 8 degrees by the end of the century, which is unimaginable for the human species. It's not sure the human species can survive. So I want to stress this, is that we've lost the fight against climate change. For practical terms, we will hit 1.5 degrees sometime in the next 5 to 6 or 7 years. And we're on a clear trajectory to get to 2 degrees, possibly 2.5, which is deeply worrying from a climatologist's point of view because of this risk of runaway climate change. Our goal now is to reduce GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, over the next 30 years to such an extent that we can bring down temperatures back to a maximum 1.5 degree warming. It's feasible. In the 1600s, we saw global cooling of 2 degrees Celsius, we now know. And this is because in the 1500s, we released measles and smallpox in the Americas. We seem to have killed off about 95% of all American Indians in 100 years. Whole civilizations in the Amazon disappeared. We now know, because we've discovered their remnants using LiDAR radar. The regrowth in tropical rainforests was so strong, we now know from carbon ring analysis, that we sucked a lot of carbon out of the atmosphere. That's kind of hopeful in a way, that we are able to suck so much carbon out of the atmosphere from reforestation in tropical countries in the space of 100 years, that we literally cool the planet 2 degrees, instead of some feedback loops like volcanic eruptions because of major rainfalls and volcanoes, etc. Complicated detail. And there's a famous book by Geoffrey Parker at Cambridge University called The Global Climate Crisis that details what happened in the 1600s. We lost a third of the world's population. The population declined over 100 years. to that extent, thanks to three factors, which is how we experience climate change. Famine, because crops fail every so often. If we get severe drought, which we're going to start getting now, as we've already seen in some parts of the world, or severe floods. You know, we may have the same rainfall, but it's going to come in dumps and then it's going to disappear for a while. Or pandemics, a feature of the 1600s. Well, we've had the first pandemic induced by human action. The IPCC Health Committee tells us that we're going to get a century of pandemics. In other words, we have to be planning right now for the next one that will come. Absolute certainty that it will come. The only question is how severe it is. We were lucky with this pandemic, which is horrible to say if you lost a loved one. 1% mortality rate, elder people. If it had been the SARS epidemic, changed the pandemic, which was at risk for a while there, that had a 20% mortality rate, and it affected 30 to 40-year-olds, not people older than 60. That would have been a very different world economy in the light of that. Well, this is the risks that we now face, that we have to start addressing with. And then the last thing we experienced in the 1600s was war. Substantial increase in warfare across Europe, China, and India. The 30 Years' War in Germany saw 50% of the population of Germany die in the space of 30 years. Well, you know, we do have a war across the border here, which doesn't look like a war, but it is a war by a petro-state kleptocrats using fossil fuel revenues from Europe to try and protect their global market position. Folks, it's related. We're going to see more of these, especially where we have autocracies that are trying to protect market position or in what's going to be a declining period of fossil fuel revenues, clearly. We expect war to be a feature, but there'll be other reasons for war. If we get another couple of really severe incidents in Pakistan, we saw major loss of life last year from floods linked to extreme climate change, then we have two nuclear states that 100 million people are going to try and cross the border. There's a risk of war there, etc., etc. So this is the world we're going into. We have to prepare for that. We also have to keep on our targets to get emissions down to try and stabilise. Well, all those things I'm talking about happen at 1.5 or 2 degrees. The 2.5 to 3 to 8 degrees is unimaginable. It's not likely that humans will survive. To be very clear. And there is an epidemic in global climate scientists of depression because they've been saying this for so long, and when I speak to senior climate scientists, they tell me they don't think there's a future for their children. Humans have never been alive on this planet as a species with greenhouse gas concentrations at today's level, let alone in 2100, where they're expected to be 60% higher. We just don't know what it means. I'll tell you one thing it does mean, by the way. The more GHG in the atmosphere, the more CO2 in particular, the slower our brains function. We get stupider as the greenhouse gas levels rise. Doesn't bode well for the human species at the end of this century. The pressure is going to build. I say this not because I'm going to say there is certainty, because there's no certainty in any future. We could be hit by a meteorite. But one thing I think that is pretty reasonable to suggest is the pressure for action will only go in one direction. We are not going to see a reduction of the pressure for action. Now what that means is if you're in the camp that is looking for solutions or trying to craft solutions, moments will come when your solution is suddenly on demand. Change doesn't happen in a linear fashion in any world. It happens in steps. Invasion of Ukraine was one of those steps which reset European energy policy. Still in a similar direction to where we're going. More of these are going to happen. Prepare for the step changes, at least to use scenario planning around what those step changes are going to be like, so that whether you're a corporate or a government or an NGO for that matter, you've got an idea of what to do. And that, of course, affects investors. Volatility is the new norm. We are going to have a very volatile 21st century, thanks to climate impacts and all those other things related to it. That's baked in now, at the very best projection of climate change. If you're an investor, you're going to have to try and figure out how you manage volatility, how you make bets on things that will prosper in volatility and won't be knocked sideways. It's going to be very tricky for some of our institutional players. There are ways through it if you're conscious. That's the key point. The pressure we're seeing starting to appear. The IRA in the US is an example of a response to that pressure. It only goes in one direction. Even if Trump wins the next election, which seems very unlikely at the moment, this won't change the trajectory of history. It's very clear that industry is moving in these things anyway. Even Republicans in the US, with the Republican Party generally... What were you going to say? I'm abandoning my microphone. Can you hear me at the back?
Yeah. Right, thank you.
In the US, where Republican counties generally now deny climate change, across the US, gas-fired power stations have disappeared as an investment proposition for municipalities because solar is simply cheaper. In other words, the change is happening. Texas gets 50% of its power from wind energy. Texas, an oil and gas state, because it's simply cheaper. Some changes are now irreversible and beginning to affect everything. We see this happening not just in the US and Europe with Repower EU, but in India, Japan, and I'm going to say China. The news we get in Europe is always negative, but the truth is China's invested more in renewable energy every single year than any other country in the world for the last 15 years. And in the last 12 months, those investments have gone through the roof, partly as a response to the climate crisis last summer, when we saw major droughts in the Sichuan Basin, the collapse of hydropower, and 50-degree heat, people were dying in the street. And of course, every air conditioner in the country was going full pelt, which meant huge energy demand. Now, like every country, like in Poland, like in Germany, like in Italy, there are different views about how to address those peaks of energy demand. China has decided to massively grow renewable, but also to build some new coal-fired power stations. We're saying they're wrong, because the biggest bottleneck in China, this is sort of familiar in Poland, is grids, because they haven't connected all their renewable to the main grid. They actually should be ramping up those investments rather than building what they know in the provinces as coal-fired. The disputes about the best way forward will continue to happen. The trajectory of change is very clear and very set. That's the background to all of this. A tsunami of change is coming through the world economy as a result. Every single country has now committed in the developed world to 2030 targets, not 2050, 2030 targets. Will they get there? Not all of them, no. Are they likely to institute major change globally? Absolutely. It's not just Europe out on a limb on this. It's Japan as well, it's South Korea. It's India too, where I was a couple of weeks ago interviewing the CFO of Adani, a company rather than the news lately, but still surviving, about their hydrogen and renewable energy plans. They've got $70 billion pipeline of green hydrogen and renewable energy. He said on stage in front of an audience there will be no new capital investment in coal in India. In India, where the country still likes to say, we're going to build coal, the West has to pay us not to. They're just not doing it because it's not financially viable. It's a foolish investment. Adani makes money off their coal-fired power station, the largest private owner of coal-fired power stations in India, but they make 2.5 times as much money per unit out of their solar. So their problem is simply capital cost. If they can get the capital cost down, they can do it. And we all know capital cost can be everything, but they're doing it anyway. $70 billion pipeline. A tsunami of change is coming through. The future has been decided. It's just a matter of the speed of change. We need to get ahead of that change in every country. We need to start picking winners and avoiding losers and navigating this rapid change that's coming through. At least investors understand that. Now, what does that mean? Well, clearly, we need to understand the opportunities. The work we've been doing on taxonomy, in the European taxonomy, imperfect as it is, I'll come to that, but if we just look at the broad guidance, is essentially developing a shopping list for the future that for investors is a proxy for lower risk, because it's less likely to be negatively impacted by forward policy change. Simple as that. That means that you can get preferential access to capital if you've got things that are green. Will it be 500 basis points difference? No. Will it be 30 basis points difference? Yes. Depending on your rating level, of course. I'm assuming you're not AAA. But we do have opportunities there beginning to appear. The sorts of things that are very clear. One is, as you've seen in the last 12 months, energy efficiency. If you had an investment in a heat pump company in Europe, you are doing very well right now. The installation of heat pumps is going through the roof. There is global crisis of supply in that area, not just in Europe, because it's a simple thing to do and it reduces the need to import energy from overseas and so on. Poland has enormous potential around energy efficiency. It has public sector institutions like EBRD wanting to invest in that sector, and we'll hear from someone from EBRD a little later who will say about that. And we have private investors now appreciating the significantly short returns on investment periods around energy efficiency investments in areas. That's the number one. 38% of the emissions reductions we have to achieve, according to the International Energy Agency, by 2050, are in the built environment. That's buildings like this, making them more energy efficient. There's a transport pipeline. We will hear from Ministry of Finance later about the transport pipeline, which is huge in Poland. Clearly rail, potentially electric vehicles and electric vehicle manufacturing and rail manufacturing as well. But shipping, we've now seen the installation of battery-powered ferries between Sweden and Norway and Denmark, for example, and in Finland. This is an example of how shipping is beginning to shift. Maersk has commissioned large biomethane carriers. We're seeing in Singapore, where I've been working, a shift towards ammonia-fueled long-haul transport. And in aviation, the Commission is just about to publish taxonomy extension criteria for aviation. Is it good enough? I would argue not quite good enough, but it's a very good direction. You will see where we're going. Mining. So I had a conversation with a couple of people from KGHM yesterday about this. The European Commission published a Critical Resources Act draft on the 14th of March, which identifies priority minerals for the green transition. Very important. Copper is one of those things. There will be lots of other investments in rare earths, in cobalt and so on. Some of those will be European. There will be opportunities in Poland and certainly in Central and Eastern Europe around these sectors. Energy, of course, is the big one. You know about renewable energy, you heard from earlier speakers. There are some emerging bits of science which we need to be cognizant of. In the last 10 years, we've seen a global spike of methane. This is actually the most significant greenhouse gas at the moment because it has, albeit a short lifespan, maybe 15 years, it halves but our big problem is the next 10 years. So in that context, methane, which is 84 times as potent as CO2, is a huge problem. We now know that across the gas supply chain, there are enormous methane leaks. So in our global calculation of the relative benefits of gas-fired power stations and coal-fired power stations, it's now clear, and we will be releasing some modelling about this during April, it's now clear that gas is not actually better than coal. I have been making speeches saying I want Poland to keep its coal-fired plants open and not shift to gas. Why? Because everyone knows coal's got to go. And as the plants come to their end, we'll close them down and we will replace them. If we shift to gas, we're locking in 30 years of fossil fuel infrastructure, which now, if it's better than coal, it's like 10%. It's not 60% better. This is the new science, folks. Now I'm going to say, for those friends from PGE in here, no utility in the world is fully grasping this at this stage. The EU taxonomy does have a provision around measuring life cycle gas, but that's difficult. Every country in the world also has gas in its transition mix. We're having arguments in Singapore at the moment where they have been building new gas-fired power stations. Unfortunately, they are no longer consistent with what the climate science is telling us we have to do because we have been calculating our emissions footprint wrongly. We have been failing to measure emissions when we now know there's massive leakage. We know why? Because of satellite mapping and methane leakage, which is our norm. There are multiple suppliers. We are seeing where it's happening at wellhead and at shown. And in LNG plants, if you're shifting LNG from Qatar to Poland, you get a 6% leakage of gas fugitive emissions, make up half of that. Half of that is captured in the ships to use in power. This is good. But the other half escapes into the air. Guess what the magic figure is to make a gas plant, once you can, life cycle emissions, a similar emissions profile as a coal-fired power plant? 3% fugitive emissions. And when you've got 84 times as much potency as CO2. So LNG plants, or rather plants that are using LNG gas, need to be understood as being only slightly better than coal, if at all. This is a shocking development which we've yet to actually grapple with. Of course, the energy security fight that we're currently having in Europe, now that we've realised that Russia's been aggressively convincing us to build gas plants for the last 20 years, is an opportunity to shift this. It is extraordinary, the sort of things Russia's been doing. In the anti-fracking campaign in Germany, we now know that Greenpeace and other NGOs got money from the Russians, but they didn't realise they were getting money from Russians. There were donations made that can now be traced back to Russia to support anti-fracking campaigns. Now, I'm not a big fan of fracking, but it gives you an extent to which the Russians were intervening in the European debate around gas solutions. German utilisation of gas went up 50% in the last 12 years, at a time when it should have been going down. When we now calculate Germany's emissions footprint, if we bring in the emissions that have been leaking across the supply chain, actually it does not look very good. In fact, Germany's footprint's been very bad. So you get a sense of the sorts of issues we're having to deal with. There are, of course, opportunities arising out of the energy thing. A lot of talk about hydrogen here. Realistically, it's hard to see how Poland will be a big producer of hydrogen. But across the border, in Denmark, I met with the Ministry of Finance recently. Their 2030 plan for wind is extraordinary. They're planning to build enough offshore wind to power, on a good day, 25% of Europe's entire electricity needs. 25% of Europe. That is extraordinary. Now, they won't be able to do it all because they need grid connections everywhere, they're not there. So what they're doing is building an offshore island and creating a vast green hydrogen plant that will create ammonia, green ammonia. That's an interesting opportunity. So are we actively pursuing the grid connections to Denmark to take advantage of that? Not yet. But we need to be. It's not difficult. One company I know is building a DC line from Morocco off the coast of Spain, avoiding an inland connection, to the UK and the Netherlands to export solar energy direct from Morocco into those northern markets. Underwater electricity provision lines are actually easy nowadays. Another company I know is building it from the Northern Territory of Australia to Singapore to supply what they believe will be 25% of Singapore's energy needs. A line under the water to Denmark is not difficult to do. We need to be developing these kinds of infrastructure investments now. And of course, don't forget fertiliser. Poland's a big user of fertiliser. It's got to be green. Yara in Norway is looking at this. The Fertiliser Industry Association knows that it's changed. It'll be hydrogen-based, probably generated in Mauritania or Morocco or Egypt or Algeria. And that's fine. And then, of course, in agri, a large industry in the sector has to shift. There will be changes in practices. All I'm trying to say is there's a lot of opportunities. Going green is not just about energy. I will be interested to see Poland's energy policy when it comes through. But that doesn't mean we are stuck with just dealing with energy. That will change inevitably because there's a tsunami coming through. Renewable energy is getting cheaper. Solar, 20% cheaper on average per annum, going in the past and going forward. We do not expect that, or at least the solar scientists I know, do not expect that to change in the next 10 years, which is extraordinary. We're actually talking about solar globally, this is, becoming the cheapest energy source humans have ever had on this planet. We're going to see a new era of cheap energy on the back of it. Certainly, like all those Republican counties In the US, they're abandoning gas for solar simply because it's cheaper. We will all reap benefits from this change. Will it be generated in Warsaw? Don't know. But one thing I know is that the connection across Europe is a critical part of the transition. Look, I want to finish in saying capital is ready to move. We've proven it's ready to move with the green bonds market, now $2.5 trillion outstanding. It was $2 billion when we started 12 years ago. And it continues to grow as a share of global capital markets. Investors, when they are offered an opportunity to invest in investments that give them a reasonable return, but are also addressing climate change, will move in spades. I have unquestionable investor appetite in the fixed income space, and I believe that's translating now to the equity space. We just need supply. Poland could do a big shift and deliver a lot of supply to global markets and more, over time, local markets. Public sector entities like EBRD and EIB want to help this now. They have aggressive plans to make it work. The taxonomy work we're doing will become easier. The regulatory environment will become very conducive as the next 12 months go on. The opportunity is immense. This is not a few $1 billion of opportunity. This is a few $1 trillion of opportunity. Let's make it work. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Now, can I ask both Lukasz's to join me? That's easy. So, as Sean just told us, it's a massive opportunity, and I think we hear that quite a lot from all parts of the system, especially what I would call the believers, right? Because this topic usually attracts people who already are interested, who already believe that there is an opportunity. But at the same time, we have quite a lot of challenges too. Regulatory policy, mindset, you name it. So I think we're very lucky today because we have two of you who have tried to push the mindset change and show some leadership in terms of sustainability. Sometimes I call Central Eastern Europe as the hostile territory to some new ideas, especially when it comes to greening. So I think it's more important than ever that we have this leadership. So on my immediate left, I have Łukasz Jakonski, who is the founder and chairman of Montis Capital. He also works with Friends of Europe in Brussels, which was a pleasant surprise because it's a fantastic institution. And Łukasz Olszewski, director of S&P Global Ratings. So we have two practitioners now to discuss how do we actually overcome these challenges. And I would like to start with you, Łukasz, and ask, so what are the kind of key trends that you have observed in the financial space over the last few years, and also the trends in Poland? And has the war in Ukraine actually had any impact on the financial sector considerations?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's great to be able to speak here today together with you. First, a little comment on what you refer to see as somewhat lagging the Western Europe when it comes to sustainability. Well, I can only agree with that. We are late adopters, but I believe that actually creates an opportunity, this one. But coming to your question, three key themes as far as sustainability finance is concerned. Well, first of all, over the course of a relatively short period of time, we started out very slow as sustainability finance as an asset class. Nobody really paid attention to that space. But over a very short space of time, this dramatically changed. The market picked up in issuance volumes, specialized investors came to the market, and all that led to currently total number of outstanding or volume of outstanding sustainable finance bonds exceeding 3 trillion. Yes, it fluctuated over time. Yes, it slowed down in 2021. But I believe, given the circumstances and the great gap between the investment need and actual investments, I think that bodes well for the future. And this asset category is kind of bound to only grow. So that's one. Second trend that I observe talking to a lot of companies and banks is a change of mindset. Sustainability journey that companies engage on requires a mindset change. So what started out, when we talk about sustainability, companies at first thought, okay, yeah, that's another kind of tick the box exercise. Let's assign this job to, I don't know, investor relations manager. He can do those tasks, carry out those tasks along other duties he has. But very soon, everybody came into realization that that's the wrong way. Sustainability is one of those subjects that transcends the entire organization. Therefore, you need a full engagement and focus from the whole team, all the employees, starting from the very top at the board level, trickling down to the very bottom, to the very last employee. And that requires, as I said, a mindset change. And that's a big thing, actually, that I'm observing. And those who engage on that change first reap the biggest results and successes. And the third thing I wanted to mention is regulation. Again, at first, sustainability space was totally unregulated. There were a number of say, rating assessment companies who were doing, providing their kind of methodology, and that ranged from A to Z, from left to right, from top to bottom, which created somewhat confusion in the market, lack of comparability, and many other challenges around that. And in that regulation space, I think we're going to see a lot of accelerated change happening over the next, I'd say, 12 to 24 months. ESMA already, ESMA, which is a European financial market regulator, equivalent of SEC in the US, they expressed their interest and readiness to start regulating ESG, what we call ESG ratings. And what they're already doing is they're going through a consultation period. Only last week, I'm going to read it out, only last week, European Commission has unveiled the proposed directive on green claims, which is a totally revolutionary thing, I think. It's a new set of rules requiring companies to substantiate and verify their environmental claims and labels, which means to protect consumers from greenwashing, which is a great thing. I mean, because nowadays, many companies say that they're green and responsible, but in practice, it's not necessarily so. So I'd like to point out those three themes that I see.
Thank you. I think the regulatory landscape definitely has changed, and I think that DG ESMA and the efforts to actually stop the worst of greenwashing will be very interesting to watch, because up until now we can't really price some of the products because, well, we don't know what really is very green, and this is where the taxonomy comes in as well. Let me turn to you, Lukasz. So I'm actually very curious what started driving your interest into sustainability and sustainable finance in particular. And also, what are the kind of practical changes that you as an investor would like to see, or what is the kind of big change that needs to happen in the investment sector in Poland?
Thank you for this question, and thank you for the invitation to speak here. I think what actually is driving our interest in the sector is something what heard beforehand with the great introduction by Sean here, really describing what is the current state of the world that we're going through. So meaning what actually the climate change will have an effect upon how the way we live, the way we, about the environment and the surrounding of us, and also about this will have a direct implication on the economy and the business that we're on. Because we're observing that actually the climate change has an impact to every industry that is right now surrounding us. Anything from the easy ones like energy energy generation, to circular economy, to the way what we eat and how we get our food. This is all going to change, and I think that this is a great, actually one of the greatest changes that we see in our lifetimes for sure. So I think that this is for us, this is a great investment team, and that's why we want to really why we want to take on. Also, what we see is that in order to actually work and help in making this change being mitigated as much as possible, of course, what we can do is that we have to invest into new technologies, and we have to invest into new technologies in all of the different industries that are surrounding us, because those new technologies have to revolutionize the way we generate our energy, the way we realize our consumption, also the way we travel. So there is so much of the new companies has to be created and new technologies to be financed that we see a lot of opportunity around this space. And also moreover, as we are funded from Poland and operating mainly in the Central Eastern Europe, we see a lot of opportunities in the region, because we have to admit that Poland and the sea is quite backward when it comes to still sustainable investments and climate tech investments, if I can say in this sense. We are the most polluted area in European Union and still has to catch up greatly. There's some different, of course, figures around the table, but for example, one figure that sticks always in my mind is the estimate made by McKinsey last year that it will cost Polish economy 320 billion euros to achieve the goals until 2030. So yeah, net zero goals. So it's 320 billion euros. So when we actually look at how much money has to be invested in all of the different stages of technology, it's absolutely huge. So I think that the opportunity is really out there, and we really believe in this. And what I can say is that really the mindset that has to change is the mindset of investors believing that they have to, that investing into the climate change and to investing into sustainable investments is something of absolute priority, because the climate change has impact on all of their businesses. So all of the businesses has to start investing into the sustainable way and has to start investing in a sustainable way. So I think that there is lots of education still to be made, actually, among the different actors, both in the Central Eastern Europe. So I'm looking at us as a venture capital space, also the financial industry, the banks, regulators, and also the national bodies such as the national development funds, or also European funds, where actually they have to look more and actually helping out more in this region, because there is the sea is much more backward than the rest of the European Union.
Thank you. I agree. I think it's a very interesting question. Whose responsibility is it to drive the change, right? We always say, well, it's everyone's, because we all get affected in one way or another, whether we're private citizens or whether we are professionals who work somewhere.
Can I pick up on something
Lucas
said? I'll try to be quick. I think the key thing that ought to happen to make a meaningful change is to, for way too long, investors, companies, all of us, focus on economic return too much. I think it's high time we change this focus and look at clean environment, creating a safer place for our children as a great value in itself. Not necessarily expressed in economic terms, but working towards this higher cause, which as far as I'm concerned, creates a much bigger value than value in dollar terms. Amen.
But then let me be controversial, because I mean, we work all across the region, and we often hear, oh, that's very nice, but we can't afford it. And I just flew in yesterday from Bucharest, and there were several people who said very nice ideas and everything. There's a new report on SME reporting on ESG for the stock exchange there, which is very interesting read. I really recommend it. By our partners, ROSIF. But the interesting point was I just got a really big pushback saying, well, that's very nice. Central Europe, you're already a bit richer. There's a bit closer convergence to the West. We can't afford it. So can we afford it? And do we need a slightly different incentive system in place, or what needs to change?
I will argue that yes, we can afford it, but it's all about the mindset that we talked about. So once you change the mindset, you will realize that you can afford it all because it's worth it. It might require more work and effort in terms of raising funds, but for good, meaningful projects, I think there always will be funds to fund those projects. So when anyone is telling me, oh, it's too expensive, oh, we cannot afford it, you know, those people, those individuals ought to take a step back and take a much wider perspective on things. And all of a sudden, they will realize that they can afford it and move on with those projects. So I always, well, oftentimes I get similar kind of pushback from companies I talk to, but then we engage in such a discussion, and you know, one thing leads to another, and 3-6 months down the road, they're like, wow, yeah, we made a change, we made the first step. Because oftentimes what I see is that many entities want to engage because they somewhat feel and understand it's important, but have absolutely no clue where to start. So making this first step on this sustainability journey is critical. And I know it's difficult for companies who have, you know, tens of years of history of doing their day-to-day business the way they're used to doing it. And the mindset change, that's why the mindset change is the most difficult one. Yet it reaps the biggest benefits once actioned.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. It's about the internalization of the understanding of what the bigger picture is and why we are doing what we're doing and what the kind of medium to longer term goal is. So let me turn back to you, Lukasz. So we're very aware that there is a lot of skepticism towards the green topics and sometimes even European Green Deal. We saw recently a study that looked at the average Central European investor is between 50 and 63, usually white, middle class, male, and Eurosceptic. So those are the kind of all the statistics that we got, which was a little bit terrifying if you think that we need this change, we're running out of carbon budgets, you know, we need to do something. So my question is actually, how do we overcome? Because I actually love the fact that we have both of you speaking up, because this is exactly, you're younger, but anyway, we can still try and fit you into the demographic of the leaders that we need. So how can we overcome the skepticism towards the greening, and who should be doing more? I mean, we already agreed that we all should be doing more, but who has the biggest power in the system that could actually make some positive change?
So I think what we should actually, again, I will come back to the same point, is that it should be actually education and awareness. It's still, this is something that we're really missing, is that we should really speak more openly about what is the impact of the climate change and what severe and severe effects it will bring upon our lives. There's, I don't know if any of you here watched, there's a good movie series now at Apple TV, Extrapolations. And I don't know, you can judge, you know, the quality, it's one way or the other, but I think it's a great show. It shows real impact on our life, what climate change brings. And I think that there should be more of this kind of to be the talk to the people. So I'm talking, you know, so this is probably this is the role of the governments, is to educate fellow citizens what is really the impact of the climate change. But then when looking at our industry, I would actually look more that we should look at the main actors in the financial industry. So the financial corporations, banks, the stock exchange, but also private investors, because we as a venture capital fund, we are mainly playing around among the private investors. And when I talk to private investors here in Poland, they actually lack the imagination of how big impact climate change has on on their businesses, even in a very medium term. And this is completely, I don't know, a lot of the times we recently had a meeting as a fund with WWF, and I had this amazing graph which showed actually simply to the business, what is your market going to change, your whole industry is going to change, your business model change, you're no longer going to be in the business. So it's actually realization of how big impact is I think very important. So I think what will help is, of course, the incentives and good regulations done by European authorities or by the national regulatory bodies, because this is always helps. It also creates opportunities for the private markets and public markets to really go around and work with really helping with the climate change. So I think the taxonomy is a great tool in this respect, because it will finally set standards and will bring the realization to the business actors that, look, you have to start playing according to some rules, and I think that this is a great thing. So we should have more of this. And also the directive, as you said, among the corporations is also setting the right standards. So I think that there is a big play around with the European Commission doing more around this and recreating the market, because I think that the private markets should really do more. And also the collaboration, so collaboration among the private sector, the public authorities, the European authorities, on really working out what are the real clear solutions in tackling the climate change. This is very important.
Thank you. I mean, that's the very interesting part, right? The regulation, the regulatory bodies, starting from Commission to national governments, can actually really change the playing field. Because up until now, we have an old business model where externalities are not priced in, and you can just use natural capital and then socialize the costs, which are not a very nice
thing. And the taxonomy is a great starting point.
Yes. So kudos to the taxonomy, even though it needs some usability and market socialization and other things, which will bring me to the next panel. So thank you so much to both of you for joining. We will now just do a quick swap over. And I would like to invite Sean, back Katarzyna, Agnieszka, and Robert to join me on the stage.